All right. Welcome back to the Be a Man podcast. I am super excited tonight. Most people don't know everybody has their own hobbies, right? And one of mine is the study of giants. And most people look at me like I'm crazy when I say that. But I have the awesome opportunity this evening to sit down with Travis, who is a much more expert than I am on this subject. And I am really excited to have you on, Travis. Why don't you introduce yourself? Describe what you do, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, first off, thanks for having me on your podcast. And yeah, so what I do since 2010 to 2013, I started researching. I was doing like ancient Celtic research on the ancient Celts, and it kind of led me into these burial mounds. And I started to research the burial mounds and who the mound builders were. And come to find out, there's mound builders over here. There were mound builders in the US, and they were all over Europe. And I started to come across giants being buried among these peoples. And so because I wasn't expecting that, I kind of took a turn into just looking into giants to prove if this was really accurate studies. And I was finding on the internet, right? And
Yeah.
so I wanted to prove that these are real news articles. And so that's what I've been doing since 2013 is just, you know, continuously almost just plugging away and researching old newspaper databases from the US, like the Library of Congress newspaper database, and just having to use search words and trying to find these articles, and they do exist. And so I've just been, blasting them out there. I've been getting a little better at it as I've gone along, but if you go back to the
Yeah.
very first, like, what is this guy doing? I would just put the year. That's all I would put, just the year. And now I'm starting to put the year, the date, the newspaper, and all that too. So, because
Dude,
people start asking me.
it's cool. I'm reading these. I actually had my wife reading some with me last night because I was telling her, I was coming on with you. And it's like, she's like, that was what? That wasn't that long ago. And she's reading these articles. I'm like, yeah, they're like pages and pages of these things where you see them. And I could see where back then people would have just glanced over this more than likely, because they're living their life. Times were different. But now it's like you look back and it's like these people didn't really gain anything from sharing that story. Like it's different than now. I mean, is that what you found too?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. It is different than now. And to your point, like a lot of these, they weren't on the front page of the newspaper most of the time. They might have been page
Mm-hmm.
3, and they weren't always at the top of the page. They're just down there. And so you're right. They weren't trying to sell a story. So there wasn't like fake
Mm-hmm.
news. There might have been one or two guys that tried something, but these were people who were like, they were moving westward, right? They were moving across the Appalachian Mountains. They were finding new lands, building houses, building railways to connect the east to the west. And they were just coming across these burial mounds. And sometimes they weren't burial mounds. Sometimes they were just massive, because not all of them were in mounds. Sometimes they were just like graveyards where like the kings and the queens might be in mounds, but other ones like warriors, they might just be all in just rows and rows of them. Sometimes they were piles of bones. Like they just had to bury them real quick because it was, aftermath of a great battle.
Yeah.
But they would come across bones and they would report them to the locals, right? So a local doctor, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then a local newspaper would come in and report it. And then they would say, they're going to send it to this museum, or they're going to send it to the Smithsonian Museum, or something like that. So it was always ended like that. They were going to do this. So, because it was like first boots on the
Mm.
ground reporting.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And we're not just talking about somewhere like in the Middle East or something. Like we're talking the US, right? We're talking who are some names like people would recognize that have stories of these giants.
Oh, like newspapers?
Yeah.
So the Associated Press find a lot. I know the New York Times has a lot, but I try to just stick to what everybody can stick to and just go
Mm-hmm.
right to the government's website that's free, free domain. But you can pay. There are other like newspapers you can actually pay for, and just
Yeah.
do a bunch of digging. And I'm still finding new ones on this other site. So like I haven't even gone over to that yet. But the
Yeah.
Associated Press is one there, and some of these newspapers have changed names since then. So
Sure. Yeah.
like in the Dallas Fort Worth area where I live, it's like some of those newspapers no longer have the same names because they've either
Yeah.
been bought by someone else or they just changed their name. I haven't
Yeah.
even done the history on that, but
Yeah.
I just know they're not the same names now.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to tell you, part of this is very fascinating to me. I know I was sharing with you before. You're introduced to giants like in Sunday school. You talk about Goliath. You talk about the Nephilim in Genesis 6. You've got other accounts of giants that you read about. But then you start getting in school. You might read this BFG story or something like that. And you're like, well, that's crazy, right? Why weren't we ever taught these things, in your opinion?
Okay, yeah. So, in my personal opinion, I believe it's because we weren't taught this in schools. I mean, I don't even know if they were taught 20 years ago, or not
Mm-hmm.
20, excuse me, like 60 years ago in schools.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's because, for one, it would prove God's word. And by doing that, it would disprove Darwinistic theory.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. That's what makes sense to me. Um,
I totally agree with you, by the way. Yeah, I think so too. I think we've almost devolved, if you will, instead
mhm.
of evolved. And it
Yeah,
would appear that people were much more advanced in former cultures than what we would like to give them credit for today. Just
yeah.
personally opinion, I know that goes totally against everybody's common day thought, but it just appears that there's a lot that we don't know and we weren't taught. And the more you dig into it, it's like these people were far more advanced than what we want to give them credit for.
Yeah, I mean, they had megalithic structures, like just like in Western Europe, and even there are, I mean, there are places in the U.S. too where there's massive stones, like stone complexes, stone walls, and I mean, everybody knows Stonehenge. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
the same giants that were there ended up moving to the U.S. because they had similar patterns of building things. Like when they would use stone over there, sometimes they used wood hinges, and they have hinge, which is a ditch, and that it's the same type of building technique on both sides of the pond. So, but to do all those things, and they're aligning with all the like solstices, like on the summer and winter solstice, they would like the sun would
Mm-hmm.
rise in a certain spot. I mean, to know that you have to know a lot
Yeah.
for being that far back. Like they were pretty well advanced in
Yeah.
a lot of things.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And have you been, uh, or have you researched into what is at the Smithsonian? Have you done
Oh,
any research into it?
not really. I mean, I know, like, what are they? I haven't even dove into that. I mean, I have uncovered articles referring to them.
Yeah.
So, like, the Smithsonian Institute back in 1891, Pittsburgh Dispatch, they're arguing for the right to be able to excavate ancient skeletons and put them on display. Like, they kind of got in trouble in the local area of Ohio where it was at, and
Mm.
they basically argued their way out of it, right? And so that tells you one thing. That tells you that they were doing this. And then I
Huh.
have another report from 1895 where a dime museum went out of business, and they actually sent multiple experts, like doctors, different researchers from them, hired by them, to come investigate this 9-foot mummy. And
Huh.
they proved that it was authentic and that they were going to purchase it. And they said it would be a great thing to put on display. So we
Huh.
know they bought one. We know they were interested in it. And then in 1934, they're saying that they're fed up with giants being unearthed and people unearthing these giant
Huh.
humanoids and reporting them because they didn't have control of people finding these things. They just had to deal with
Yeah.
it when it was reported, and they were getting tired of hearing it. So somehow they took control, I guess, of the whole narrative, and so none of this stuff is reported anymore.
Hmm.
And I don't really think people are digging. I mean, I guess they could be digging under the umbrella of a university or something into
Yeah.
some mounds, but in the U.S., it's kind of protected. It's sacred, and
Yeah.
I get that. I kind of agree that we shouldn't just be going and digging into burial mounds, but
Yeah.
these guys did
Yeah.
back in the 18 and 1900s, and I'm glad that they did because now we know, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
We know, and it was just wild for me to find out that these guys were living in our backyards, right?
Huh. Yeah. Oh yeah.
All around the
Yeah.
U.S.
Yeah. I'm in Illinois now, and I'm not too far. I'm about 2 hours from St. Louis. And I know there are some things down in that area that I want to go check out because I've been reading stories about how much they saw when they were traveling the Mississippi. And you see guys like Lewis and Clark, like I was sharing for you with you before we got on here, and others who saw these tribes, who saw these mounds, who saw all these things. I'm like, this is like right in our back door. This is right here. But
Yeah. Yeah. You got that massive Cahokia complex, which is the largest pyramidal structure in the U.S. That's right outside of uh, St. Louis area, I believe.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So,
Yeah.
what are I'm sure you have some accounts there with you, but what are some of the coolest stories you've read?
Oh, my favorite ones are the ones where they're like 10 feet, 11 feet, 15 feet high, because that
Yeah,
tells you that it's just not somebody who is big,
yeah,
right? I mean, sometimes you find a whole group of them that were around 7 feet tall, and that still tells you that it wasn't just one person that was big. It had more to do with some sort of a bloodline or
hmm
some group of people, right? So those are kind of my favorite ones. I can read one or two if you want me to.
yeah. I would love that.
Okay. All right. Here's one in Pennsylvania, 1921. So it's like, so around the 30s, 1930s, it kind of slowed down. Like you don't really find a lot of reports. So it's getting kind of close to that area. But they found a 9 foot skeleton on opening a mound near Greensburg, Pennsylvania. The curator of the Carnegie Museum of Pittsburgh, Dr. Rowland, unearthed the skeleton between 8 and 9 feet tall. The mound was 100 feet long and more than 12 feet high. And they assume, it says, the most interesting feature in the recent excavation was a mummified torso of a human body at least 4,000 years old. The parts of the skeleton were shipped to the Carnegie Museum, and this is a report by the Scientific American. So that's pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a big guy, a really big mound, and a a pretty good size giant, really.
definitely.
Um,
Yeah,
There's another one here from the
yeah,
Wheeling, Virginia Times, 1856, of a skeleton of a giant. Um, the skeleton itself were measured by the sheriff, and together, both were perfect. And let's see, 10 feet 9 inches in length, and the jaws and teeth were almost as large as that of a horse. This one's really hard to read, but I mean
it's crazy.
that's almost 11 feet high.
I mean, that's crazy. Like our minds can't hardly even fathom that today. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
really. I mean, that's
Yeah,
almost two of me. It's just crazy.
yeah, yeah. And a lot of times these things, when they were like multiple times, I've come across reports where you've got one that's 8 feet tall, but it said their shoulders were 4 feet wide.
That's
And then
nuts.
their bones, like that said, their bones were more like horses' bones,
Hmm
which horse bones are really thick, and their teeth were like horses' teeth. So it just and a lot of times their skulls were about an inch thick or more. So
hmm
just like the skull walls.
That's just nuts. I mean, it's just crazy to think about, and the fact that we never hear about this, like ever. You know what I mean? Like we never hear
Yeah.
about that, and it just it's a little frustrating just because
Mhm.
you're like, why aren't we hearing about these things? And especially because they're an essential part of history. And then you read stories like there's stories about Alexander the Great, who many say he was much taller than what a lot of people want to attribute to him. And he would have been one of these types of people. And it makes you wonder if a lot of these key figures in history were maybe these kinds of people. I mean, have you thought about that at all?
That's funny you mentioned that, because I multiple times I've come across this one article that was reported in many different newspapers, and
Mhm.
I don't know if I've ever reported it, but I think I will now that you mention it. And
Awesome.
it mentions all these people in history, and some of them I don't recognize. It says this
Mhm.
guy or this Charlemagne or this one, and it says that they were giants. I'm like, what?
Hmm.
I've never heard of this. But this is a report I think it's in the 1800s, somewhere around there, when it was reported about, even more like more prehistoric times or ancient times.
Hmm.
And so I never reported it because I was like, I mean, this isn't a report of somebody digging up a burial mound or an ancient grave site. This
Uh-huh.
is just stories. But maybe I should just throw it out there because maybe there's something to it.
Well, I agree because I think the more we study, the more we research, the more we find that they were people, but they may have been much more common than what we like to think of today. And because I mean, you see a 7 foot guy like we were talking about. I mean, that's a giant to most of us. I mean, most of us aren't anywhere near that. But these people are like, 3, 4, 5 foot taller than that. And what happened? What happened to them? Or
Yeah.
are there still maybe some around? Like you hear this
Yeah.
story about soldiers in Afghanistan and things like that. I'm sure you've heard these stories. It's like,
I have. Yeah.
well, maybe I don't know. I just don't know anymore.
I mean, I honestly think that they could still be here, or some of them in some places. And if we were to dive down that rabbit hole, they probably would be living under the ground, at
Yeah,
least during the daytime hours, and very remote places. But kind of like in Afghanistan, like that story
yeah,
goes, like it was like in the mountains somewhere where nobody really was hanging out.
yeah, yeah. That story's fascinating to me because there's just too many people have shared details that unless you had been there, it would have been very hard to collaborate that story. And I
Yeah.
just something happened. I don't know what it was, but something happened there, and it's fascinating to dive into because our I think there's parts of us that may be just a little scared to think that these things could be real.
That's probably a big deal. That is a big deal right there. Is the
Yeah.
fear factor? It's like, wait, if we don't think about it, maybe it's not going to be there, right? But I get it though. I get it.
Yeah.
It makes sense why some people just don't even want to think about the topic because the what ifs.
Yeah. All right. I have to ask you. My wife told me I have to ask you about this story you shared recently. It may have been Peru. Was it like 39 foot or something like that? Super,
Oh,
super tall on your Instagram. That
okay.
just, I'm like, what? That's just way out of league from what we normally see.
Yeah, okay. There's a 32, like I found one article, and let's see here. It's okay, a 32-foot tall, and
Yeah.
this may be different than what she's remembering, but I have one in front of me here. It's
Yeah.
from 1919, a discovery in Mexico.
Hmm.
Um, let's see here. Skeleton of giant discovered, Mexico City. The fossilized remains of a giant measuring 32 feet 10 inches in height were, according to the report, recently discovered by workmen near the little village of, oh gosh, I can't read that. Nana something
Huh.
of Veracruz. And that's the end of the article. But we do know that giants live down there. And
Yeah.
I found another report of it was an Aztec legend that I came across, and it was a group of giants fighting off another group of giants. And then in
Huh.
turn, those group of giants were destroyed by some sort of earthquake, it said, that was thought to be some judgment from the Lord God. And
Huh.
and they were all around 15 feet high. Those ones were. But this one here, yeah, 32 feet. I kind of attribute that one to like being one of the a Nephilim, right? So
Yeah.
just like all these other ones are, you could categorize them the same because they're all descendants. But like
Yeah.
whenever I'm categorizing, I call Nephilim because they're like so huge and so like mind-boggling
Is that how
big.
you distinguish the two? Like normal giants, and then like you read these reports, like this is like crazy
Yeah,
tall.
yeah, yeah. Because I know the Bible talks about like, the Rephaites, their
Hmm.
forefather was Rapha, and
Hmm.
and according to the text and the way it sounds, like he was the greatest man of them, so he would have had to have been
Hmm.
the original Nephilim. So he might have been pretty big,
Yeah.
bigger
Oh
than
yeah.
bigger than King Og, and King Og is around 16 to 18 feet. So if he was a descendant of Rapha, well, Rapha could have been up around the 30 feet zone,
Yeah.
maybe.
I wonder, pre-flood, the world changed so much. Like our minds can't
Yeah.
quite fathom. I do wonder over those periods of time people were living, people I imagine grew a lot taller. I mean, if you kind of uh, I mean, just put all the
Yeah.
info in, just try to think about that. Dinosaurs, if they were really as tall as what we are led to believe they were, and
Mhm.
taught that they are, um, and people were having dominion over those creatures. You don't read about them being scared or any of those things of them, and it's like I think people were a lot taller. I think people are a lot stronger, bigger, just because of the period of time they were living. I mean, you're talking hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's possible because I mean, pre-flood, they say the atmosphere was different, right?
Hmm.
That's a study. That's a whole other topic. But
Yeah.
like because the atmosphere was different, things were living longer, right? And that
Yeah.
might have been one of the ways God turned the time clock back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it has to be a force of nature for him to work. I think he can work outside of his own realm
Sure.
of, because
Oh
he's
yeah.
miraculous. But like that is, yeah, you've got a point there. There's definitely, like, I tend to believe the giants pre-flood were taller than the second giants that came about after the flood, like the Goliaths, the King Ogs, and
Yeah.
all the Amorites. Even though God does say they were as tall as trees, cedar trees, they might not have been as tall as some of the ones pre-flood. And
Yeah.
and Rapha and Arba is the original Nephilim, who is the forefather of the Anakites, and all these are post-flood giants.
Sure.
So they were as tall as cedar trees and strong as oak trees. So that could have been 30 feet. I mean, I really don't know how tall the original ones were. They could have been bigger. I don't know.
I mean, I there's no way for us to know, truthfully,
Mm,
but it's like
right.
it's interesting to speculate, I think, and just things had to have, and I do think bloodlines and those types of things played a role in the flood happening. Personally, the Nephilim were tied to that, um,
Yeah.
based on what we read and see there. But
Yeah.
truthfully, we don't. I mean, I think the world changed quite a bit after. I mean, things were not the same any longer. But then,
Right.
I mean, even the stories of dinosaurs and things, you see old paintings, you see old mosaics, wall art, you name it, where it appears that they were dinosaurs still living,
Yeah.
even much more recent than what we have been told. And it just
Yeah.
makes you wonder, like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, like why have they lied to us for one, and then why? I mean, what's the point? And like, it just makes
Yeah.
you want. I think part of what interests me so much about this is the curiosity. It's just fun to learn something new that we were never taught before, in the right way.
Right. Yeah.
What drives you? What drives you in this search?
I think it's similar. It's very similar
Yeah.
reasons. It's like, it's just, to me, it's fascinating. It's like, this is really pretty cool. All
Yeah.
this history that I was not searching for. Like, I knew of the giants, but I didn't know that they were so close to us as far as like living around where we were living. Like, I didn't know
Hmm.
there was races of them here in
Yeah.
in the US. I didn't really even know that they were all over Europe. I just assumed they lived right there in the Holy Land. But we have to remember, like, now I know that they actually, for one, they probably fled after Joshua started fighting them. Two, we were
Hmm.
told that they intermingled with other people of the land, and so at you know different types of people just moving out from the Holy Land in all different directions. And I'm not saying that they only lived there. They could have lived anywhere around the world, but it seems like they focused there
Hmm.
for certain reasons, right? So,
Hmm.
but yeah, that's what drives me. It's just it's so fascinating. One, we weren't never taught it, and I feel like it needs to be told,
Hmm.
right? I feel like it shouldn't be suppressed from everybody. So
Yeah.
that's why I
I
enjoy doing this.
yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, what are you hoping to accomplish ultimately with all
Yeah.
this?
Well, I would say for one is to tell the truth about history as much as we can in
Hmm.
regards to this, because a lot of people will find out about this and it'll make them dive back into the Bible, I'm sure, and like they'll
Hmm.
look into it. So that's for me. I don't want to prop the giants up on a pedestal,
Hmm.
right? It's a pretty fascinating topic, but they don't supersede the Lord God.
Yeah.
And so that's I want to be able to tell the story, but in a way that he reigns and he has a final say. Like let's talk about the judgments against them in the Bible. Like the devil
Hmm.
tried to use them, but guess what? It didn't really work that well, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's really my goal is to keep that in the forefront, and then just to
Yeah.
share the history of it.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. I thoroughly um, commend you for this pursuit, because guys like me who run across your accounts, it's really cool to start reading these stories. Like, I'm staying up at night when I can't sleep and I'm reading all these stories about giants. I'm like, hey, babe, hey, you got to hear this, you know? Like, she's like, oh,
Yeah.
come on. You know what
Oh,
I
let me
mean? It's
sleep.
like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know. I'm like,
yeah.
this is amazing. And I don't know.
Oh yeah,
You have
yeah.
like a couple more pretty cool accounts you could just share with us? Because
Sure.
I
Yeah,
just think guys, when they hear this, they're like, this is cool. I never heard this before.
yeah. Okay.
Okay.
This is a cool one. From 1918, Pennsylvania. Oh, good grief! I butchered this word. Archaeologists find skulls of prehistoric giants. The archaeologists who were transversing the Susquehanna River Valley in Pennsylvania, visiting sites of Indian villages and digging up aborigines and other relics, are said to have made a most astonishing discovery on the Murray Farm in finding the bones of 68 prehistoric men. The average height of these men, when their skeletons were assembled, was 7 feet, while many were much taller. Additional evidence to their gigantic size is found in the massive stone battle axes in their graves. The average age of these men is said to have been from 30 to 40. Another amazing point of this discovery is the allegation that perfectly formed skulls were found from which horns grew straight out from the head. So it's saying that some of these
Mhm.
skulls seem to have like horn like
Huh.
growths, which whenever I first came across that, I kind of stayed away from it, but I
Yeah.
kept finding more. I found them all over the U.S., from
Huh.
California to the East Coast, and they weren't always coming from the same spot. And like
Huh.
sometimes it said it's above the ears. I've actually found one that said two horns grew out above the ears and then downward below the ears, so it had four horns on his head.
What do you make of
And
that?
I just think I I kind of think it's a Nephilim trait.
Hmm.
So I compare it to like the Bible doesn't say anything about horns, but it does say that not all the giants, but some of them had 6 fingers and six
Yeah.
toes. Um, Now we find some of these skulls have like double rows of teeth on the top and bottom jaw, which means
Hmm.
you have a row and then directly behind it, you have another set of teeth,
Hmm.
which is kind of not really supposed to be.
No.
Then there's still people like in China. Like a few years ago, I found an article. This one lady started growing a bone out of her head that looked like a horn, and
Huh.
so I just think it's something weird that happens because of this bloodline. It's not the bloodline was never supposed to be a thing,
Yeah.
and so weird things happen like that, like the double rows of
Huh.
teeth, an occasional. has a horns or two, two horns or something, or bones
Yeah.
sticking out. They're never like super long, like an inch and a half. So there's not
Yeah.
like they're not
Yeah.
huge like Viking horns,
Yeah.
but it makes you wonder, like, where did the lore of the devil having horns come from? Where did like Viking helmet?
Yeah.
Why did Vikings wear horn helmets sometimes, or
Hmm.
the Celts more than the Vikings did? Honestly, had the horn helmets.
Huh.
Where'd that come from? So it's
Yeah.
like I don't know, but this article is one of my favorites because you have 68 men that were 7 feet and greater, all in one area, and their battle axes, their huge stone battle axes, were there with them. So
I
that just
just
tells you that it's a community of giants or something.
yeah. Oh yeah. That's fascinating. Like
That's one of
the
my favorite
horns.
ones.
Yeah, I mean that's just cool to hear about because you just don't hear about stuff like that, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because it wasn't. I mean, keep in mind, it wasn't all 68 of them that had horns. It was just some of them.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had a bunch of that. It was just saying some of them had these weird horn growths or horn like protrusions off their skull that were actually like bone material.
Yeah.
So
You
whatever,
just
I
gotta
don't know what to make of it.
you gotta wonder what the guys like digging these bones up and stuff. They're like, what in the world is this?
Yeah, I think they were kind of excited about it when they would find
Yeah.
this stuff because it was mind blowing to them. It's like this is
Yeah.
not what we expected to find. What is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they knew they were humanoids, but like, why are they so big? Why are their bones so thick? You know, so
Yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
that's another one of my favorites.
Huh. How how recent have you how do I put this? How recent of a story have you found where there have been giants dug up? Like let's say 1900s, like I know you
Mhm.
said 1920s it kind of starts to fall off, which I wonder if the
Yeah,
Great Depression had something to do with it as well.
yeah, it could have.
Resources limited, then the wars, stuff like that. I
Yeah,
just wonder, like, how recent, how modern do some of these stories go back?
yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. You got it on point there. It's around the middle 1900s that I've found. I have come across one of a report in 1900 of, let's see here, just make sure this is the right one.
Sure.
1907. 1907 is the one I'm looking for here. Los Angeles Herald. And this is a report of he was a missionary and he was traveling around Alaska and he went so far north part of the northern parts of Alaska. Uh, he went even further than like where the Inuits were living or something like that. The
Oh.
way this report goes, and he came across a race of. He said they were kind of white in color,
Hmm.
and when they were like all gigantic. He said all the men were. Uh, let's see. During the stay of more than 8 years among these people, the priest did not find a single tribesman who was not much taller than the average American. So, like, all the men were just huge.
Huh.
And he stayed there long enough to kind of master and learn their language.
Hmm.
So, but it's kind of funny because there are other, like in the same area, there are reports of skeletons being unearthed, giant prehistoric skeletons being unearthed in the same area. Um, They're around 7 feet. So there might have been
Oh.
that makes sense with what his story is.
Yeah.
That's a 1900 report of 7 foot skeletons being unearthed in Alaska, and then this 1907 is a report of this priest, Reverend Francis Barnum S.J. And he was a real guy. I had some guys do some buddies of mine like to look up my articles that I post because I don't have
Sure.
time to do that. And
Yeah.
he always proves all these people are real people
Huh.
in these articles. Like he can look them up on ancestry.com, find that he's a real guy. He's even contacted some of their relatives and say, "Hey, did you know?" And then sometimes they don't even know about these
Huh.
discoveries.
That's
So
cool.
it's yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty wild. So
That's
that's my
awesome.
most recent, and that's a most recent report on these gigantic people that were actually living still.
Yeah.
So that's the late 1800s. They would have been alive up in the northern parts of Alaska.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
That
I
yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but that's
Yeah,
I
it
feel like it's the
does,
best
definitely.
way I can. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it
Good.
definitely
Good.
does. So, Travis, I know we're starting to wrap up here, but where can people learn more about you? What you're doing, what you find, what you post, all those types of things.
Okay. Yeah. So you can find me on. I have an account on Instagram and Facebook, but I post mostly on Instagram, and the name is Giants of Ancient America. So the way it's written is Giants _of_ Ancient America on
Hmm.
Instagram, and I think I have over 1,000 now of
Yeah.
posts on there. And so with all those posts, I probably, well, let's see, I'll tell you how many I have on there because I know off of all my posts. So I'm at 1285 right now. So I'm probably getting close to 1,000 actual articles,
Sure.
right? So some of them I'll rebirth from the bottom. Like I'll bring one back up because only like 3 people saw it back in 2013, right? So
Yeah.
like bring it
Oh
back
yeah.
up because it's a really interesting report. So I do that, and I'm always trying to find new ones though. Like
Yeah.
one of the last ones I did, I've never seen before out of all these years of researching. So
That's
I always
cool.
get excited when I find these,
Oh
really,
yeah.
and I dig and dig. It takes a lot of work to dig for them, but it's
Oh
fun
yeah, I'm
to get them
sure.
out there and put them out there. So
Just to read some of these, I mean, when you post them, like you can read them pretty well, but some of them it's like, man, you got to like really mess with the filters and all that kind of stuff. You can tell that you're trying to really clean that up.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's hard. It's still very blurry sometimes, even after I've edited it and lighten
Yeah.
it or darken it, or it's like I
Oh
run it
yeah.
through this, just to get it right as best I can.
Yeah.
But it's fun. I just like to be able to put it to where you can actually see the newspaper. That was one
Yeah.
reason I started this, is because reading books and stuff, I was just reading type, which is fine.
Mhm.
But I wanted to see the real pictures of the articles.
Yeah.
So that's why I really like doing this, is just to put the picture of the article out there.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of what I'm doing and part of why I wanted to have you on was to talk about something I'm super interested in. Is super cool to read about. But also I try to encourage guys to pursue things that interest them, expand your knowledge, know what you're learning, be discerning, learn how to uh, not just take something at face value and just say, well, that must be how it is. Like, pursue these things, learn these things. And I really appreciate you coming on because you have shared something with the guys who listen that I think will be very challenging to them because this isn't something you normally to hear about it, right?
Sure.
It's not something that you normally talk about, but it's something that will give guys something to be passionate to study and learn more about. And I really appreciate coming on, Travis.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be here. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
And I appreciate how you tied in faith as well. Because a lot of these things, a lot of people pursue archaeological things and history and things, but they don't tie in the Lord. And we have to remember that the Lord he's sovereign over it all. In his good providence, he allowed giants to be in this world. And
Yeah.
it's pretty cool that we get to study it a little bit.
Uh, I like how you put that.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I end each podcast with giving you an opportunity to kind of just give the guys some type of challenge for the week. Maybe something to pursue, maybe something to research, study, a habit, anything like that. Could you just give the guys something to kind of take on this week as a challenge?
I mean, in relation to this topic, or just anything really?
Sure. It can be either way. It's up to
Okay.
you, totally.
I mean, for me personally, like I just try to stay connected to the Lord every day, like, and so just to stay in prayer a lot. Like you're saying, be discerning in your decisions you make going about each day. Um, and I just try to keep the Lord God on the forefront of my mind, But in regards to
Cool.
this, like, I think this subject here can be faith building in a
Mhm.
way. So like in the very beginning, I was like, oh, this is so cool. I wasn't doing it on purpose, but I kind of elevated the giants in my mind, and that's
Mhm.
not good, right?
Mhm.
It it's truth, and it's real, and it happened, and it's very cool history, but it has its place.
Mhm.
So, and the Lord is above that,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I say it's good. It's good faith building for me, and I think it
Mm.
can be for a lot of other men. Um, but that's where I would encourage people to keep it, is keep it there in your mind. Don't elevate them. It's pretty cool history. Yeah. So like the ancient Celts, their leaders were giants, but so what, really? It's just
Yeah.
I used to say, oh wow, this is so awesome, and it really is still pretty awesome. But like I'd like to keep them where they belong, right here under God.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I That's awesome. Yeah. Giants are cool.
yep,
God is much cooler.
that's right.
Put it like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Here I am attacking my own stuff I do. No,
No.
that's not what I'm
No.
saying, but you know what I mean. Like, yeah, I
No.
think it's important to keep it all in.
Yeah.
Keep it where it belongs.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
shows that you have good motivations, and I appreciate that very much. So with that, man, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been fun. It's been personally
yeah,
fun for me. I've been really looking forward to this, and
yeah. Me
I
too.
appreciate you, Travis. I do.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
All right. With that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this talk. If you have any questions, reach out to Travis. If you have any questions for me, reach out. I'd love to answer any of those. But until then, I hope this encourages you to go and be a better man this week.